The next evening after supper, Leroy cornered us. "Hey cousins, want to take a ride?" "Sounds okay with us," Spud said, without asking me and before considering our history of pranks with Thad and Leroy. Both Thad and Leroy have been driving since they were my age. They both have farm worker driving permits that allow them to drive farm equipment and trucks on and around Uncle Billy's farm, which is plots of farmland checkerboarded with the woods on both sides of the lake. Uncle Billy's rule was they can drive his rusty old GMC pickup to the farthest cornfields he rented from the Rottenberry brothers, in either direction from his trailer home, using the gravel and dirt roads and anywhere on the acreages he farmed. Of course, our cousins immediately took this to mean they could drive the full length of the gravel road, 11 miles south to the paved state highway. Thad scattered a bale of straw in the bed of the GMC to cushion the ride for Spud and me, and we took off with Leroy behind the wheel and Thad riding shotgun in the cab. For a 14-year-old kid, Leroy was a surprisingly good driver. He slowed down when he approached curves, hilltops, and rough places in the road, and he kept his speed slow to control the dust cloud we left behind, saving Spud and me from choking on gas fumes and dust. When we passed the Rottenberry place, the two old men were walking up the hill from the barn toward their house. Leroy honked, but only Vern looked back and waved, while Hy kept trudging up the hill with his head down. About a mile south of the Rottenberries we crested a hill and slowed to a stop to let a passel of hogs cross the road. We stood up and leaned over the cab and sides of the pickup truck bed to watch them pass. "Where'd they come from? Did they get out of their pen?" Spud asked. "They belong to the Rottenberries and run free range in these woods. They're probably headed to one of the feed bins out there," Leroy said, pointing in the direction the hogs were going. By the time we reached the state highway, it was getting dark. Leroy pulled over and Thad took the wheel and switched on the headlights for the drive back to the cabin. When we got to the place where the hogs had crossed the road, Thad slowed to a stop. "Why are we stopping?" I asked in a worried voice. "I must have run over something back there. It sounds like we are dragging it." "Do you two have a flashlight?" Thad said. "Yes, I've got a pocket one that's pretty bright," Spud answered. "Could you and Louisiana get out and look under both sides of the truck to see what it is?" Leroy asked. I wanted to tell him to stop with the stupid nicknames but knew if I did it would only encourage him to continue making up new ones. "What about those hogs?" "Isn't this where they crossed the road?" I said. "Nah, I think it was farther back. Besides, you don't need to worry about them. As long as they found a full trough of food they'll leave you be," Thad said. "Yeah, unless the old boys forgot to load the bins, like they did the last time we were down here," Leroy laughingly added. "Come on, Lou, let's just get it done and get going, it's pitch dark out here," Spud said. I cautiously eased over my side of the truck, keeping an eye out for any stray hogs that might still be heading to the feed bins. I looked underneath as Spud shined the flashlight from the opposite side. "I don't see anything hanging down or dragging," I announced. "Nothing under here, either," Spud said. "Okay, would you walk alongside the truck and keep looking as we slowly back up," Leroy said. We waddled along beside the truck, bent over searching the underside. "Nothing," Spud reported. "Let me pull forward slowly, maybe backing up worked whatever it is loose, and it will drop down," Thad said. We started waddling forward with the truck, then walking faster bent forward, and finally, we were trotting beside the truck when we heard Thad shift gears and watched him pull away from us. "Wait, wait," Spud yelled, as he ran full speed after the truck, but the GMC kept going, leaving a curtain of dust and our cousin's laughter in its wake. "They've done it to us again. How many times are we gonna let this happen to us?" Spud shouted, as he threw his cap onto the road. That whole blue heron thing was a load of crap, a red herring to gain our trust. They were just setting us up for this prank. There are more than 2 Rottenberry brothers at this lake, and their names are Rotten Cuz 1 and Cuz 2. What are we going to do now? Surely, they won't leave us out here all alone in the dark. Uncle Billy would punish them for doing something like that, wouldn't he? I said. Uncle Billy thinks everything they do is clever, or haven't you noticed? Spud said. But not this. There are wild animals out here, flesh-eating hogs, and don't forget about the Rottenberries and all those missing kids, I said, trying to convince Spud and myself that the threat of being punished would ensure that Thad and Leroy came back. We can't believe or trust anything those two skunks tell us or do. We just took them at their word about something being wrong with the truck, and this is what it got us, he said. Yeah, I know, but they are probably just down the road waiting, and once we catch up to them or when they think we're scared enough, they'll come back for us. Spud shined his flashlight down the road, but it was not bright enough to reach very far. If they are waiting down there in the dark to surprise and scare us, we're gonna fight them. But they are bigger and stronger than we are, I said. I don't care, I want to give them a taste of my anger. I'm not saying we shouldn't get even with them, but we're smarter than they are, and we can do it without fighting, I said. And on what evidence do you base that? Spud asked. He was right. I was not sure how we were going to get even with them or if we could. After all, we were batting 0 to 1,000 against them, but I had to convince Spud that we were smarter or watch him get beat up. Besides, they were our cousins. It's okay to argue and have falling outs with them, but not to have physical fights. Right now, I think we should start walking because I'm scared those hogs might come back, I said. I've never paid closer attention to sounds in the night than I did walking back to the cabin in the dark. Crickets tried to mask all the underlying sounds from the woods, but my hearing was like a barn owl's, homing in on a mouse at midnight. When I picked up an unfamiliar sound, we either hurried up, slowed down, or stopped to let whatever made it pass by. Except when we heard the hogs grunting and rooting up the ground on the side of the road, then we ran. We reached the top of the hill leading down to the lake and the Rottenberries' place, just as the moon was rising above the trees. It cast a pale gray hue over the cornfields and lake in the distance below. We were over a mile from the cabin and still hadn't seen Thad, Leroy, or the GMC truck. At the Rottenberries' gate, we heard a vehicle coming from the direction of the low water bridge and the cabin and saw its headlights bouncing off the road and corn rows at the far curve in the road. Spud grabbed my hand and pulled me with him as we ran past the gate and toward the Rottenberries' barn. Quick, let's get out of sight. If it is Leroy and Thad, we're not going with them. We've come this far on our own and we can make it the rest of the way to the cabin without them. Let them drive around in the dark looking for us. Maybe they'll get scared when they can't find us and need to explain to Uncles Charlie and Billy what happened. That should get us partially even for being ditched, he said. We ducked inside the open barn door and watched the headlights approach the gate. It was the GMC. Leroy got out and looked around, then hopped back in and the truck took off up the hill and out of sight. I think the coast is clear now, let's go before they turn around and come back, Spud said. As we stepped out of the barn, we heard a door close at the Rottenberries' house up the hill. Back in the barn, Spud ordered, in a hushed voice. He flashed his light around, looking for a place to hide. The 2 mules we saw with Vern in the field the day before were in stalls at the back of the barn. The rest of the stalls were filled with burlap bags of livestock feed stacked on wooden pallets. Up there, Spud said, pointing his flashlight towards the ladder leading to the loft. The loft was partially filled with bales of straw. Spud doused his light and we ducked behind a stack of bales overlooking the barn door. The moonlight dimly illuminated its opening below, allowing us to see the silhouette of a man walk to its threshold and stop. "Who's in here?" the silhouette said. We froze and held our breath as the shadow moved closer and melted into the black below. "Last chance before I let the dogs out," the voice from the barn floor said. "Did he say dogs or hogs?" I whispered. Spud put his hand over my mouth to silence me. We could hear him moving around below and the mules snorting. We silently inched back into the corner of the loft, where we found a tarpaulin covering some boxes and odd-shaped items. We slid beneath it and laid still on the loft floor. Then we heard the man climbing the ladder and saw the beam from his flashlight washing over the outside of the tarp. For a few seconds, everything was silent, and I thought he must be waiting and listening for us to make a sound. I tried to hold my breath, waiting for him to make the first move, but he kept listening. My pulse was racing, and I had to breathe. I exhaled slowly and took shallow breaths. Together with my throbbing pulse, they sounded like thunder in my ears. Finally, we heard him walk back to the end of the loft and descend the ladder. We laid there in silence for several minutes before lifting the tarp and peeking out. "Is he gone?" I whispered. "I think so," Spud answered. Spud leaned over the edge of the loft and peered into the barn's dark floor below, before switching on his flashlight and splashing its beam over the items under the tarp. "What's been poking me?" he said. I spied a coil of copper tubing lying at Spud's feet. "What do you think that's used for?" I asked. He picked up a pot laying next to it. "Along with this, I think it's part of a moonshiner's still," he said. "So it's true." Everything Thad and Leroy said. The moonshining, the hogs, and the missing kids. Are we about to become missing kids? "Quiet, Lou, you don't want that old man to hear you and sick his dogs on us, do you?" he said. Back on the road, we ran as far as the low water bridge before stopping to catch our breath, then ran the rest of the way to the cabin. Uncle Charlie was waiting up for us. "Where have you kids been so late, and why are you out of breath?" he asked. "Riding around with Thad and Leroy," Spud answered between gasps for air. "Oh, I didn't hear the truck pull up." "That's because they dropped us off back on the road, and we raced each other here," Spud said. He wasn't lying, he just neglected to tell Uncle Charlie how far back on the road they dropped us. "Well, you kids better turn in and get some sleep. Tomorrow's going to be a big fishing day on the lake. We've got to rise early and get ready for the fish fry tomorrow night." During the night it started to rain. The gentle sound of rolling thunder in the distance woke me, and I laid there listening to the rain and thinking about our dad. I wondered if this was how the approaching thunderstorm on the day he died sounded. Although, I have always imagined it was a violent and wild killer storm that stole him away from us, not this gentle sound that put me back to sleep. The next morning, we all donned rain ponchos and took the flat-bottomed John boat out to check trout lines for catfish. By 9 we had collected enough for the fish fry. Back at the cabin, Spud and I helped clean and fillet the fish, then settled into our bunks on the sleeping porch to listen to the rain, read, and play cards. At lunch, Spud asked Uncle Charlie who was coming to dinner. "Your Uncle Billy, Aunt Dottie and the kids, and I've invited the Rottenberry brothers, Vern and Hi. Billy and his family are only around for planting and harvesting seasons. The rest of the time they come down here part-time to relax and check in on things. Vern and Hi are the ones who watch over their crops, Billy's house trailer, and our cabin for the rest of the year. And they don't get much chance to socialize with others when we're not around since they don't own any motor vehicles or have many neighbors nearby. So, this is a good time for us to get together to visit and thank them for all they do to help us out." "How come they don't have a car or a truck? Isn't that kind of backward?" I asked. "You two probably haven't been down here enough to know this, but they are not exactly modern about anything. For instance, they don't have electricity at their farmhouse. They still use coal oil lanterns and candles in the house at night, and they have a rainwater cistern for their drinking and household water. They used to have a truck, but when they got older, they stopped being active farmers. Now they rent their fields out to others, like Billy. The only farming they do anymore is raising some hogs to size and sending them to market, and there's not much work to that since they let them roam free range in the woods," Uncle Charlie said. "But we saw one of them harvesting some ears of corn over by the low water bridge." "He was in a wagon drawn by a couple of mules," I said. "That was Vern. He keeps that team of mules and himself busy working small plots like that one, and for doing chores around the farm. They get some sweet corn and feed for the hogs out of his efforts, but most of the hog feed these days they buy and have delivered by the farmers' co-op." "What if they need to go to town?" Spud asked. "There's Sager's General Store down on the state highway, and the county shuttle bus runs through here mornings and afternoons twice a week. It's not as convenient as what we're used to, but it meets their needs." I could tell that Uncle Charlie knew a lot about the Rottenberry brothers, so I decided to jump right into the conversation and get to what I wanted to know about them. Thad and Leroy told us that the Rottenberries are moonshiners, and if the authorities find out about it, they'll send them to prison, I blurted out. That seemed to catch Uncle Charlie off guard because he didn't say anything right away. Spud and I sat and watched him as he processed what I said. He finally blinked and a little smile crept onto the corners of his mouth. Wow, those boys sure have vivid imaginations, don't they? He said. Then it's not true, they are not moonshiners, I said. Well, if they are, they might be doing what is usually called home brewing, and that's not illegal. After harvest, they make just enough grain alcohol to last them and their friends until the next season, but I don't think they are selling it, and I doubt if the authorities would care about what they are doing. I was about to ask him about the missing children and the flesh-eating hogs when Spud spoke up. Where'd they get a name like Rottenberry? I'd get it changed for sure, he said. Let's see if I can remember. Hyde told me that his parents and grandparents both had large families. He and Vern were the last children born to their parents and are the sole survivors of the Rottenberry name. Their grandfather immigrated from Germany with his parents before the Civil War. When he was 17 years old, he rescued a 14-year-old Cherokee girl from the icy waters of the Mississippi River during the Trail of Tears forced march from the Appalachians to Oklahoma. She begged their grandfather to help her find her way back to her home in Tennessee. But he knew if he told anyone about her or turned her over to the army, she would be sent on to Oklahoma. So, he told her he would help hide her and convinced her to come with him to this area, which was still backwoods in those days. They were both so young, I guess it was only natural that not long after they got here, they became common-law husband and wife. According to Hy and Vern, the family name was difficult for his grandmother to pronounce. It started out sounding like Ruttenberg, but over the years turned into Ruttenberry and finally Rottenberry, perhaps even changed by their grandfather along the way, to protect their identity and keep his Cherokee wife from being taken away to Oklahoma. The brothers were born in that house and are lifelong bachelors. This is the only life they've ever known, so be nice to them and respect them. Sometimes I think Billy's kids tease them in ways they don't understand or appreciate. Yeah, I can see that happening, Spud said. Well, kids, if there is nothing else, I have a canopy to set up over the outside picnic table to help keep our guests dry. I was ready to ask another question, but before I could speak up, Spud frowned and shook his head no at me. I think we are good for now. Thanks for telling us about the Rottenberries, Spud said. Why didn't you let me ask him about the hogs? I said after Uncle Charlie left. What were you thinking, asking about moonshiners? I guess if you had asked about the hogs, the missing children were going to be next. Haven't Thad and Leroy made big enough fools out of us for one trip? Do you want Uncle Charlie telling everybody after dinner about how gullible we are? Spud said.